Welcome to Who is Jesus? Episode 59. And we're looking at the last part of Mark chapter 15, from verse 21 to the end. We're looking at the crucifixion and the death of Jesus. Verses 21 to 32, we read the crucifixion. The deed is done. And I'm going to read that in its entirety from Mark chapter 15. A passerby named Simon, who was from Cyrene, was coming in from the countryside just then, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. And they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they offered him wine drugged with myrrh, but he refused it. Then the soldiers nailed him to the cross. They divided his clothes and threw dice to decide who would get each piece. Now it was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. A sign announced the charge against him, and it read, "The King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Ha! Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well then, save yourself and come down from the cross." The leading priests and teachers of religious law also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see it and believe him." And even the men who were crucified with Jesus ridiculed him. The deed is done. Verse 33. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. And then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Verse 37, Jesus uttered another loud cry and breathed his last. The deed was well and truly done. But the next verse tells us something exciting. The curtain is torn. Verse 38, Mark 15, verse 38, and this is one of the most exciting verses in the whole Bible. The curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. That was the curtain that kept the priests away from going into the presence of God. Only the high priest once a year could go into the holy place. And it is true that they used to tie a rope around his leg, around his foot. Ankle would be the place. And as he went in, he brought the blood that was there to bring forgiveness for the whole nation of Israel. And he offered that blood on the horns of the ark. And that blood said to God, "Please forgive us." And if that sacrifice was accepted, the high priest got to walk out. If the sacrifice was unaccepted, the high priest fell dead. No one could go in, and so they had to pull him out by the rope around his ankle. But this story in Mark's Gospel tells us that this curtain, this huge, great curtain made of thickness that so nobody could see, was torn from the top to the bottom. And the exciting thing about this is that Jesus' offering of blood was accepted, and God burst out of that place of hiding, in a sense, in the ark. His presence was just hidden away. It was now revealed to all mankind. You and I could know the truth that God is here among us and wants to fellowship with us. That curtain was torn from top to bottom, and Almighty God burst out in his total presence before the people. It had such an effect that all sorts of amazing things happened. One of the Gospels tells us, I believe it's the Gospel of Matthew, that people rose from the dead. People in their graves round and about rose from the dead. It must have been a phenomenal time. The deed was done. The life had been given, and the curtain was torn. But what of Jesus? Was it an acceptable offering? I believe that the curtain being torn was a sign that the offering has been accepted. But I said a few weeks back that these chapters we're looking at, running up to the end of Mark's Gospel, are two of the most important events without which there would be no Christianity. Jesus did not come to be a good teacher. All of us are born and eventually die. But Jesus was actually born to die. And that was one thing that happened as we read through these chapters. But what of his body? The body was buried. We read in verses 42 to 47 that the body of Jesus was buried. And if that was the end of the story, then we have no Christian faith. If that was the completion, then there is no Christian faith. He was just a good man who taught some good things. And we can take it or we can leave it. But next week, we will hear the final part of Mark's story of who is Jesus.